it was honestly, it was incredibly, it did affect me, because I thought within 2 seconds of meeting someone, how they made that kind of,
Yeah.
what was the need in that context to mention, the word terrorism or terrorist?
Do you think your cultural heritage or your race shapes you in any way?
I don't think it does. I mean, and I know, I'm sure you would probably have the exact opposite point of view, which only goes to like further reinforce the sort of, white privilege that I have, and I'm not denying that in any way. Yeah, it's never hindered me or affected me or defined me. I can just get on with it and just,
I guess, it has obviously changed in how I have to carry myself. As someone of colour, I have to be really careful as to how I go about myself. Because if I go about myself in a certain way, it can be perceived as something totally different. And then suddenly it's going to go into a spiral of events that 9 times out of 10 go negatively. And so it's just something that, sadly I've had to like grow up and be conditioned with, and like I've gotten to that point where it is what it is. I'm not going to act on it like, I guess, act on being a typical stereotypical black man. I don't know what that is. Like I'm just myself, and like, but of course I'm not naive, and I'm always wary of how I'm perceived and what that can do for me. But in the grand scheme of things, I can't worry about it too much. Times are changing and things are moving hopefully in a good direction.
Something that just popped in my mind. I remember sitting on the tube and there was a group of like probably 6 or 7 white guys who were obviously coming from like some work do, and they were all really drunk, and they were like singing and like going up to people and playing rock paper scissors with them, and and they were drunk and they were being rowdy. And I just thought, had that been, just swap that entirely and just have those 6, 7 guys being black doing that same thing, and the atmosphere would have been entirely different. And like to hear you say that you have to like sort of weigh up this, where you are, and perhaps even tone down, I don't know, your behaviour because of how that might appear to other people, it's just really sad.
I can't stand this concept when people are, oh no, I don't see colour. Bullshit.
That's offensive.
You want to see colour, it's like, when people like come with that jargon, I'm just like, no, you're chatting bullshit. Like just be honest, like, we are living in a time where, there's so many different races and cultures, and so like, we can't be blind to it. And so, I'd be naive to think that it doesn't manifest, especially being someone of colour and like experiencing what I've experienced with people. It has come down to the colour of my skin, but and they won't admit to that, and that's okay. But it just doesn't make, we can't be naive and think that it's not there, because it very much is.
I mean, and that's even just talking about people who are living here who are of a different colour, but never mind someone who's a foreigner, someone who's not wasn't born here but who's moved here, and the treatment that they're facing. I think that's probably one of the biggest embarrassments or whatever that our country's facing at the moment. It's just the way that they're treating everything you hear at the moment is, whether it be the Windrush scandal or whether it be the stabbings that have been going on, like that's racism. If it was white kids being stabbed in, Chiswick or whatever, like that would be sorted.
It's going on everywhere, just within inner cultures, like, with Indians and Bangladeshi, like, even the Asians, like there's racism within themselves, It's not just black and white, there's so many other races out there that are kind of going through the kind of same process, really, and like that same kind of thought process. And so, it is sad that it's there, but, with time.
I don't really know how it impacts my life being a white man in the UK. I don't think it makes any difference, positive or negative. partly, I guess, because being white, you blend in. It's not even like, no one clocks it. Whereas if it's, you know, somebody who looks different in a crowd of 50 people, it's human nature to do so. You're going to see that there's something different. So I don't think that my heritage has impacted the way I live my life.
Hate crimes have soared due to, and these tend to be based on people's race, but then also even to the sort of more intrinsic aspects of society, the innate things that happen, the not so obvious subtleties that people can experience that sort of highlight that racism still exists.
Yeah, I think that it's, I think it is still an issue, kind of on many levels. There's extreme levels to it that are kind of quite obvious. I think there are also a lot of kind of subtle labels beneath the surface that are actually quite problematic for a lot of people.
I would say it's quite personal, but in my former relationship, the individual's mother, immediately when I met her, she mentioned the word terrorism, and I thought,
wow.
I thought, oh God, so all I've said to her is my name.
Oh gosh.
So that happened, and obviously later I was informed. She was quite a reader of the Daily Mail, so
Oh.
but not to say, but yeah, it was honestly, it was incredibly it did affect me, because I thought within 2 seconds of meeting someone how they made that kind of what was the need in that context to mention the word terrorism or terrorist, purely on the fact that she knew I was of Muslim heritage.
I had my brother change his surname for job interviews.
Oh wow!
And just to see, just as an experiment, he'd been using his middle name instead, and he was like, I get so many more replies based on that, as opposed to using my full surname. And again, that shows you if it was called Smith, that wouldn't been like as much of an issue. And then again, that is privilege that people need to be aware of. And it's not a thing of I'm trying to find who's the victim and who's what. It's just like, this is what's happening. Can we just take that in and start these conversations, as opposed to just being like, oh no, oh well then this, and then trying to give you like one token experience of something. And it's like, that's not how things work. And it is a long years and decades of colonialism, of hatred of people who don't want to hear it. So it is there. When I was studying politics or history or whatever back at school, there was a lot of African American history, and everyone knows about African American history, but there wasn't so much about Black British, which is interesting considering I was in the UK. I remember people always compare, but in America, I'm like, why are you even comparing to places when we got own stuff to deal with here? There's no point of trying to say, but it's not as bad as.
Oh my God, that gets me so much. That comparison with the States, it makes the assumption that we've reached peak equality, and I'm just like, hello. Are you living in reality? Because we have such deep issues. Yeah. It's created two scenarios where you're either completely fetishized and you're like the token, this person of color, you're going to be in front of all the photos and all this and all that.
Oh my gosh.
Or it's the other way, blatant, why are you in my country? When it's like, hello, I am from this country. I was born here. But it's as a result of us as a country not accepting we have an issue and talking about it. And then you have people in the Prime Minister going, we've had all these achievements, For example, making Sajid Javid, who's a British Asian, Pakistani, Home Secretary. Okay, I'm thrilled someone like him is in that position, and also our London Mayor Sadiq Khan. It's fantastic. Yeah. But that in itself, it hasn't addressed the race issue.
Exactly.
And racism hasn't ended because you put someone in a position of power.
I mean, it feels to me personally that we're integrating to a degree, that we're integrating more readily with people of different races and colours, creeds, religions and genders, and that's all basically it's becoming less acceptable to hold those bigoted views. But is it though? Because it's for every action there's a reaction of hate and vitriol that seems to sort of balance whatever progress is made.
Integration is a generational thing, and it takes time for kind of like bigoted views and prejudices to like die out, like quite literally die out.
Yeah. Well, we thought we were rid of the Nazis, didn't we? That was a turn up for the books.
Well, they never left. But I mean, the thing is that the like neo-Nazism is coming back because there's been kind of like this really kind of slick media campaign which like has swung Europe like to the far right, but like ultimately I do think that we are integrating, like, you know, the whole good immigrant bad immigrant thing.
Oh yeah
and like how and I think that was like kind of like really reared its head in the Windrush scandal, in how like Theresa May kind of like tried to weather the storm, and at the end of the day, like, people kind of like Commonwealth immigrants had integrated so much into British society that everyone was like, oh, when we have these like prejudices against immigration, it's not about those guys, because those guys are our guys and they're okay. And that's why like there was lots of like backtracking on immigration policy around Windrush immigrants, whereas, you know, there are still kind of like more recent immigrants, and in particular like Eastern European, Central European immigrants that are kind of like still vilified because they've come and stolen our jobs. And
because it's been happening since time immemorial. People have been like travelling from one place to another and integrating, and it basically exposes racism or kind of prejudice towards immigrants for what it is, which is it's completely unfounded. Like, it's a slight tangent, but I saw a thing the other day which rather pleasingly said that the only population of humans that is entirely kind of like genetically pure, as it were, is black Africans, because they're the only population that never interbred with Neanderthals. And, you know, find a racist and tell them this today, and just, you know, have fun looking at their face change colour. And I'm actually 4% Neanderthal, which is more than 97% of the population. And to look at me, you would say, like, if you were a Nazi, that I was, you know, genetically pure, or whatever that means.